Grow Great is a city government leadership podcast with Lisa Norris and me, Randy Cantrell. Each week we share insights, experiences, and wisdom to help you and your leadership grow great. Our website is growgreat.com. During this coaching session, he says, do you ever catch yourself just talking too much? And I said, well, yeah, like all the time. And he said, well, I'm in this business meeting. And he said, and I do this, and I've done this for a long time, and it drives me crazy. And he said, I walked out of the meeting, and I just thought, man, I just need to learn to shut up. And I said, so how long's long? And he said, oh, as long as I can remember. I'm like, well, do you do anything about it? Well, what would I do about it? I said, well, I don't know, but you recognize it, so that's good. So it's at least,
awareness is key.
Yeah, you got that going for you. And so it sparked our conversation toward the end of a coaching session about just wrestling with ourselves. And that's the topic today, wrestling with ourselves, overcoming these things that we do, that we are aware of, that drive us crazy. Now, they may and probably do drive other people crazy, but it's not based on that. It's based on, so here's a person, he goes into this business meeting, and I said, well, in real time, are you aware in the moment? And he said, yeah, at some point, but by the time I'm aware of it, I've probably overstayed my welcome, too many minutes already. I said, well, then do you shut it down? He said, well, then I'm just looking for a place to dismount at that point. He said, I'm just trying to, and I don't want to just shut up abruptly. And then people are like, well, what happened? And so here's a person who's been living with this for who knows, he can't remember how long. And I started thinking, we've all got these things.
Of course.
So welcome to the human race. If you're identifying and you're thinking, well, man, I do that, or there's something else that you do. He and I also got in a conversation about verbal crutches, and we all have them. Is a big one. Ums and ahs, those are big ones. A lot of people, and I'm sensitive to this one, I don't do it that much, but there are people in my life that do, and I'm trying to help a few of them overcome it. Ending a sentence with the question, right? I find that one a lot. We've all got those kinds of things.
We've all got something, sure. It's an awareness and doing something about it to improve upon it. You're not going to ever be perfect. You just got to have awareness, and we've all been through those. I was telling you before we hit record that we have these lessons we've learned early in life and throughout our journey. And I had a former deputy city manager. This is probably 10 years ago, and we're in a meeting. I can't honestly remember it might have been longer if I was director at the time or the manager. And he had a sense of humor, kind of like you do. And we were in a meeting, and there was probably 6 or 8 of us. I'm talking about something that I really want. And I was pushing and we should do this. And he goes, okay. And I said, and here's why. And I just think if we did this, it's going to have so many advantages. He goes, got it. You're good. And I just kept pushing, and he goes, Lisa, stop overselling. I said, yes. And so it was like, oh, okay. He goes, and he did the kind of hand across his throat. If you're not watching, like, stop. And so at that moment I was like, got it. And he started laughing, and I started laughing. He goes, lesson number 1, don't oversell. I was like, okay. Okay. And I still remember it to this day of once you get a yes, it's a yes. Just be quiet.
But do you remember what you were thinking when you just kept on? Were you?
I was still justifying the need to make sure that
were you doubting his agreement, his consent, or approval? Or
I don't remember that level.
Or?
I just know myself. When I get passionate, I just want everybody to understand why.
Yeah.
And that's when you talk about driving yourself crazy. I'm like, just be quiet.
Yeah.
But once you get hooked on something, you just want to keep pressing to make sure everybody understands. I don't know why I do it. I just recognize that I do it. The same with I do a lot of and I'll connect a sentence.
Oh,
And I recognize that all the time, but I don't recognize it until after it's done.
that's common. That's a real
And
popular
I'll go,
one.
so, and then go into the next sentence. So
Yeah.
it's
You
just,
can listen. You can listen to interviews, especially with athletes, and that's how they'll begin the sentence.
so
And the more you podcast and you listen to yourself, and this particular client and I were talking, and he was asking about the podcast, and we'd been talking about verbal crutches and things, and I said, well, podcasting helps if you listen to yourself, because everybody's got that quirk of, well, that doesn't sound like me. And all the rest of the room is going, yeah, it sounds exactly like you.
that's what happened when we started recording.
Yeah.
I heard myself and I was like, I sound so nasally.
Yeah.
But Don's like, that's exactly how I'm like, I really sound like that. He's
Mhm.
like, yeah. So now when I listen to myself, to me talking right now and to me listening to myself, they don't sound the same to me.
Mhm.
Right. To everybody else, it's just like me. I get that.
Most of us just aren't. We're certainly not accustomed to listening to ourselves through speakers or through headphones, and
Right.
the self-awareness is a big deal. So I guess as we try to wrestle with the topic of wrestling with ourselves and these things that drive us crazy, and again, that's what we're talking about, because I'm going to go out on a really short limb, because I don't think it's any limb at all, that if it drives us crazy, it's likely driving somebody else crazy.
And we all have them. Like you said, we all have something and we have awareness, and it's usually not just one thing. We'll improve that one thing and then you identify another. And that's just the journey of life. If you have any kind of self-awareness.
Well, we don't want these things to be problematic.
Right.
We want to mitigate these things from holding us back, from preventing us from being promotable,
right,
preventing us from achieving some level of high performance that otherwise we could achieve. So you're completely right. It's not about trying to become perfect, but I think there's also a benefit of not driving ourselves crazy, because confidence gets eroded.
Yeah.
And this particular client, and I'm sure it's true for me. I would suspect it's true for most everybody. If it drives us crazy, okay, well, that's just fostering more insecurity, which doesn't do anything but erode our confidence. And any of us striving to be high performers know confidence is a big deal. Now, let me qualify that or define that. Confidence in our capacity, confidence in our ability, which I think is largely born from learning, experience, and figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's natural talent to boot. So I don't define confidence personally as, well, I'm confident I can overcome that. Well, based on, well, I've overcome some other things. I'm currently overcoming some things. I'm figuring some things out, as opposed to just some blind faith that, the universe is going to work to my favor. I don't view confidence quite that way. So these are not things that are constructive, I don't think, for high performance, which is largely the topic of our show. High performance leadership in city government is really what we're pursuing, and that translates to everybody on our team. So if it drives us crazy and we're driving our people crazy, our team crazy, our boss crazy, well, that ain't good.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think there's degrees of the issue that have more or less impact on leadership. All of them important, but some have more weight, as I call it. If it's the right at the end of a question, obviously it determines how often you do that. Do you end every sentence where it's super obvious, versus like we've had a recent podcast on being succinct? That's also a verbal. If you're just going on and can't get to the point, much more severe in my mind of the way you can come across in a conversation, the influence you can have, your authority. Succinctness is really important. So I think they each of these have degrees of impact into your leadership or into your overarching verbal communications. how well you can achieve those. So all are important to work on, but definitely have awareness about ones that could potentially be more or less severe in the effectiveness of your communication. That also counts.
Yeah, if you're having a weekly staff meeting and people are doing, the tick marks, the, 4 lines and then an X to make the fifth. If they're keeping track of how many times you say right or how many times you say or ah or okay, well, you got a problem. It's an impediment. It's an impediment to your communication because your team is out there. They're counting how many times you're going to use this crutch because they just
It's an
know you.
entertainment value.
Yeah,
at that point.
they just know that you're going to do that. I don't think it's problematic until it's kind of the elephant in the room. It
right.
leaps out, and now I can't avoid hearing it. The problem
Which
with these
takes away the message.
Yeah,
it takes away the message that
absolutely.
you're trying to communicate because their focus is on something else.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
it's interesting, and it's important in my mind just to have awareness around it. As you go through, because once you identify whatever your driving yourself crazy, just the ability to work on it, like you said, that is the next step. Do something about it. You don't have to be perfect, but certainly work to improve it. Listen to yourself. Take steps towards improving it. I know one of the greatest.
If it was something that wasn't verbal, pardon the interruption, but if it's not something verbal, how would you do that? I mean, can you think of something else that might drive you crazy, or that you've heard may drive some other people crazy? I'll give you one.
Okay.
So a leader finds it more challenging to dole out compliments. A leader, they catch themselves regularly not congratulating people, not celebrating wins. They kind of berate themselves for not doing it. It's just easier for them to point out the blemishes than it is all the smoothness that's going on in the workplace. They don't like themselves for it. And so, okay, well, now what? They're aware of it. How you going to work on that?
Well, I don't know for them. If I was their leader, I'd try to help them identify ways to make it to create reminders around it of how do I need to recognize, what are my options to recognize, and then just reminding them, hey, do we have a celebration coming up? Oh, I didn't do that. Well, what ones are you thinking about? Let's go do them. You don't want to have tick marks either. Like, I have to do one a week. That's not effective.
That's right.
Right? It has to be genuine. But sometimes, and I'll give myself as an example, my gap, the thing that's hardest for me, which seems odd because I'm a very much collaborative, is recognizing like birthdays, the Administrative Professionals Day. I'm like the worst. Those are not front of mind for me. And so what I had to do is have somebody that's really great at it. Hey, Wednesday is Administrative Professionals Day. Do we want to do something? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, we need to do something. Let's do this. So I had help with that from others that had strength. And I tried to make it not a chore to notify me, but a partnership that we're in this together. That's my gap. And if you can help me with that for the team, I don't want to miss an opportunity to recognize our team.
That's a good solution, though.
Yeah. So for me, I use others that have that strength, and then not set it as a task, but as a helpful, we're in this together type of thing. And that I find people love to help others do something. It's not a chore. It's, oh my gosh, yeah, I can help you with that. And then I'd say, well, what are your gaps? Is there anything that I can help you with? And they're like, yeah, I kind of have struggled with blah, 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 blah. And then we kind of collaborate together. So it's safe.
Yep.
And it's a tool, right? It's a tool in your tool shed. It just happens to be a person that's helping you.
Have you had in your leadership journey, I'll rephrase it, describe the people that you've had in your life that were that go-to kind of a person for that thing that you wrestled with, and you knew you wrestled with it, and the solicitation of outside help?
It's interesting. I think we've talked about it before, if I recall, but my biggest go-to person, because he's blunt but kind, is my husband. And this happened, it became really evident during COVID because we were working from home so much. So he didn't see me in meetings until that point, and he's retired. He had retired recently at that time. And the biggest thing, and I knew I did it myself, you're talking about, what you do.
Yep.
And I would do it and recognize it, but I didn't ever stop it. And I remember one time I was on a call, and I think it was with my team. We were doing Thoughtful Thursdays, which is where we kind of share common things we learn about each other during those topics to keep us with camaraderie. And I was talking, and they would talk, and I'd talk, and I was over talking unintentionally. It's easy to do in a room of 14 on Zoom. Somebody starts talking, you're talking, they're talking, it cuts both of you out. And I remember I was talking to my husband looked over at me during the conversation, and I saw him, and I kept going, and then I hung up, and he goes, "Babe, take a breath and let others talk." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he goes, you're over talking them. He says, "It's not intentional. Just say something and pause and hold until they finish their sentences." Right? I mean, it wasn't in those exact words, but that was the gist of it. And he was kind, but he was like, you're just over talking them. Take a breath and let others talk. I was like, oh my gosh, I do that. I recognize,
Yeah.
You're finally hearing somebody acknowledge what you know to be true. But I didn't realize the degree until he made the comment right after that meeting. And I'm like, that is substantial. And I don't want my people to feel like the conversation is about me.
Mm-hmm.
Because their conversation is what was important to me, genuinely.
Yeah.
So I really made a concerted, you're talking about effort. Even in our podcast, it's helped me even more to not overtalk each other. And we do it occasionally just because we're both commenting on something at the same time. But I've really learned to pause and listen and let you finish. But I have to have it's a concerted effort all the time, because my brain is going 90 to nothing. Oh, I need to speak to that. Oh, and I just try to wait until you finish, I finish, or my team finishes now before I insert another question. Because Don also mentioned to me, he's like, you ask question after question after question. Let him answer the first one,
Mm-hmm.
But it was good to know, and I appreciated it, because if you don't know, you can't fix it. So
But
for
when
me,
he's
my go-to.
When he said those, I mean, but they rang true in your head.
Absolutely. I think I had awareness around it already.
Right.
So it was acknowledging, I recognized that, but I had, like you said, I hadn't done anything. I just it was always at the end of the conversation, I'm like, crap, I interrupted like 19 times,
Uh-huh.
But you don't, from when he said it, because it was that obvious. As a leader, I want my team to be able to speak freely and talk. And if I am talking too much, that's limiting their opportunities. And I want them to be heard. Now, there are times when I need to share, but I believe I've gotten much more effective at shortening the content and making sure I'm succinct, like we talked about earlier, in the message that I need to deliver, so it can register, it's succinct, and then they can respond to it. So I believe through that constructive criticism that sorry about that. I believe that the constructive criticism was helpful in improving my communication.
Well, it's a big point to not just accept it and assume, well, this is just the way it is, and there's nothing I can do about it. My advice would be, don't let it drive you crazy. And if it does drive you crazy, then let it drive you crazy enough that you're willing to do something about it and figure it out. And if up to and including if that means getting an outside perspective, to help you with it. The second thing, and we haven't touched on this, but I think it's worth at least a few minutes of conversation, is our willingness as leaders now to do that for somebody else.
That's right.
You've got people on your team who have things that may drive you crazy. How do you not know it drives them crazy too? And so you could do for them what maybe they can't do for themselves if they've got, whether it's a verbal crutch or whether it could be anything. It just could be anything. And instead, we just tend to live with these things as opposed to having a conversation about them. And that just makes no sense to me at all. I was thinking about Rhonda and I, and you and Don. We've both been married for a long, long time, and was having a conversation just about marriage and relationships and couples that grow apart. And what had sparked it was a couple that had been married over 30 years and were getting a divorce. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of this particular example, but you just got to believe that there wasn't just some seminal moment that I'm out. I mean, this had to be some slow burn.
It had to have developed over time, in our minds anyway.
Yeah, you would think it would have to have been some slow burn, and then maybe there was the straw that broke the camel's back kind of a moment, but likely sparked, we were theorizing in this conversation, likely sparked by just years of not talking, not being candid, not sharing enough. And many of us are disastrous at this at work. We assume things, and they can have a habit that absolutely we believe is getting in their way. It's getting in our way as their boss, as their leader. And we just don't say anything. And we hope that time will make it better. We hope that it will fix itself. We hope that it will go away. And when I brought up this as a show idea, one of the thoughts that I had was, what if this person that I was dealing with, I left this meeting and I just didn't shut up, and he's beating himself up. And this happened hours later. I began to think, I wonder if his boss knows. Don't you suppose his boss knows? He might not. But then I thought, well, if he doesn't know, shame on him for not knowing. And if he knows and he hasn't helped this guy through this, then even more shame on him.
That's right.
So it's a burden on us as bosses and leaders to help our people, particularly with these things that we may assume he has no idea he's doing this. Okay, what if he does? And what if he's berating himself after the fact every stinking time, and you're the person that could best help?
Yeah, our definition of leadership is a focus on others, doing for others what they cannot do for themselves. And so much about that, Randy, is in the delivery of the message. If you do it with kindness, you can have a little fun with it and go, however you want to approach it, you have to know your person that you're talking to.
Yeah, and yourself.
But why wouldn't we want to help them become better? I don't believe you need to be critical on every single little thing that they do, that they become then lack self-confidence in leading. But if it's something that's blatantly obvious and you can help them improve upon that and have awareness around it, it only makes them better for you and them, and their team. It's only a win-win-win. Why wouldn't we want to do that as a leader to help others? But you have to be thoughtful in how you deliver that message and how you encourage them to think about it, and what steps can they take to make it better, and why do they do it? They'll probably tell you, I don't know why I do it. That's what I said initially. I'm like, I don't know why I keep asking 15 questions and don't let them answer the first one. I do it. But now that I'm aware, pause. It was a simple correction. Am I perfect every time? No, but it's awareness around it. And I think I've done better at it once I became aware.
Could you notice the difference in yourself when you started really focusing on it?
Well, yes. Not only did it help me focus on getting the answer to that question asked, but it also helped me learn more about my people because I was giving them the time to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It wasn't just going question after question after question. It did help me focus on that. And we talked about being succinct.
Did anybody say anything? Did anybody acknowledge anything, or did their behavior just kind of changed? Their openness or whatever?
I mean, honestly, I think the change was in me. I don't think they noticed anything. I mean, they may have.
Okay.
But would stop after the question. So there was much more conversation
Right.
than there was before because I was rattling off questions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I'm not sure which one to answer. You know?
Yeah. What order would you like me to tackle these in?
Yes. And they never said anything. I did notice on occasion, I think with anybody, I could kind of see their eyes, you know, and when you're in a Teams meeting, it's obvious because you're on their face.
Right.
And you can just see their eyes kind of, you can just see them if people are watching, which I know only like a fraction are, but you can see them fading into the distance with their eyes like, I have no idea where she's going.
Their eyes roll up in the back of their head.
Yes. So I think that's what I noticed the most is more engagement because there was more opportunities. So I'm grateful. Who knows how long I had been doing this, but I'm grateful for Dawn for going, take a breath. Let him answer the first question before you ask your other 9. You know, it was just, and it was that succinct. I mean, he wasn't mean.
Mm-hmm.
He was just direct. And his purpose was not to make me look bad. It was to help me. And he didn't have to do anything. He's retired.
Yeah.
He is not involved at my work. But again, he was serving me.
Yeah.
His
he had an
focus was on
opportunity
my
to see
success.
you at work, which he wouldn't have had had it not been for COVID and
That's
Teams
right.
meetings. So
those are the important things that the things that get in the way of this, of self-awareness and self-improvement, let's talk about that for a minute, is when, one, the message is delivered poorly by you or others to their team, right? The person they're trying to correct. Did you hear it? I said it right. Are you going to have to work with me on this, Randy?
We've both said it. And of course, that's the other problem. You begin to point it out, and then it's like,
then it's like that yellow car syndrome.
Here I go again.
But, you know, as you're working with your team members, the things that I've seen that get in the way are the constant correction. You are constantly correcting somebody to where they feel deficit. They start lacking confidence. They're afraid to then speak up. So you don't want that. You want to do it with kindness and with positive delivery. Secondly, it needs to be something that's worth mentioning in my mind. Make it, you know, oh, you did a great, I noticed you're doing a great job on that after we brought it up. Do you feel like it? I mean, just talk to them about it. It shouldn't be the elephant in the room. Just
again,
encourage that it's okay to self-correct.
Yeah, my barometer is if it's in the way. If it's
right.
If it's in the way, if it's problematic, some things can be pet peeves. I get it. And if you're a boss and there's constant interaction, you're going to have your pet peeves. I think your people deserve to know what your pet peeves are.
Right.
I don't think you ought to blindside your people with your pet peeves. If you have them, acknowledge them up front and say, this is how I want stuff. This is what drives me crazy. I don't know why it drives me crazy, but it does drive me crazy. Well, hopefully you don't have anybody on your team that intentionally wants to drive you crazy. So help them.
Yeah.
You know, help them avoid those things. But we're talking also about things that are now just this is problematic. There are people that get on the excuse train. They just constantly make excuses. They're constantly deflecting. They constantly avoid accountability. I know some people, not many, but I know some people who recognize that in themselves. Most, in my experience, don't. But the few who do absolutely beat themselves silly about it. And I just sit back and look and wonder what the bosses are. Why are you putting up with this? Help this person overcome this problem that they themselves know is a problem. Now, if that's you going to go to your boss with that? No, you're not. You know, so now you're just trying to go it alone, which is ridiculously hard. We're asking people every day as leaders to get better. If we are driving higher performance, and we are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're driving high performance. You aspire to higher performance. Then it just makes sense to me that we would ask that of ourselves, and we would also ask of ourselves to contribute to help everybody around us do that. That's the path. That's the path forward, you know, to this whole thing. So we're not talking about all the little quirks and nuances that make us people and that are part of our personalities, but I do think that as leaders, we owe it to our people to let them know these are pet peeves. These are things that just absolutely like nails on a chalkboard. They just grate on me. Don't let your people try to figure that out for themselves. Go ahead and be honest and upfront and tell them. I remember I had so many. I mean, it was hard to keep a list of them, but I just would regularly tell brand new people what absolutely would drive me nuts. And I just didn't feel like it was right for me to blindside them, wait until they did it, and then tell them. Plus, I'm strategic enough. I wanted to see what their response would be. I wanted to see what kind of self-regulation they might implement in their own life, to avoid hacking me off. And that sounds like I was just this horrible, just mush.
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to know. We used to have in HR, I used to have a sheet that we'd kind of go over the first week or so with an employee. And on there, you're exactly right. I had one of these things. I said, here's one of my pet peeves. It's missing a deadline and not telling me about it, where I have to go ask. So I said, don't say I love deadlines and the sound they have when they go whooshing by. If you're gonna miss a deadline, tell me in advance and the why, because then we can shift. If we need to pivot, we can say, okay, that one's really important to me. What other stuff do you have that can shift? But that one I need by that deadline. So we're working collaboratively, and I know what's on your plate, and you know what's important to me. But don't not tell me, because there's people that I have communicated to on those deadlines that are expecting it from us. And that only reflects poorly on us as a team, right? So it's one of those things that you have to recognize and communicate. It's all about communication. The same thing is, as we talked about accountability in it, the high performers, I guarantee you, want to improve on those areas. Why not make it noted and help them? The lower performers, you're going to get defensiveness, you're going to get resistance, or they're simply going to listen and do nothing. And that's on everything. It's not just these gaps in verbal communication skills.
You got nothing to lose in doing it with them, because it's not going to work anyway. So
the high performers, I guarantee you, will be eager if you deliver it well and right, and talk through it with them of, how do you think we can make that better? What are you willing to work on? And it's like you and I, now it's like, gosh, there it is. I did it again. And we recognize it and want to do better. So it becomes a reinforcement around awareness to make us better in the long run, because we're aware of it.
Well, we're not willing to accept however good we were yesterday, or however good this podcast is. Lisa and I want the next one to be better. I mean, the audience can determine how good we are at making those improvements, but don't be too critical. But that's absolutely right. I mean, up to and including what we talk about, and largely you guys already know what we talk about is top of mind for us. It's real life stuff. It's real world stuff. We're not dealing in theory, and we're not dealing in academia. Those have their place. I don't besmirch those too much, but we're just dealing in the real world with real human beings. And we've all got these kinds of things that drive us crazy about ourselves. And yes, sometimes things that drive us crazy about other people. But when we're talking about our team and our role as leaders, we owe it to ourselves to put in that work to try to figure that out. And I also think, I'll end my note, I'll put a bow on my end of it, and then you can wrap it up, Lisa. I think there's a place for vulnerability in all of this. I think there's a place for me as a leader in front of my team to admit vulnerabilities. I would hate to be in front of a group of people and they're taking notes about how many times I use some crutch phrase, or how many times I do this, as opposed to what I really want them to be engaged in listening to. I would rather, if I know this, I would rather say, when I get in front of you people, I realize that I say, An awful lot. And if I were you, I'd probably be making tick marks on a page. And I want to fix this. I want to concentrate on this. Now, I could do any number of things. I haven't done it, but I've done it with some things. When you catch me doing it, next meeting, raise your hand. Well, guess what? Hands are going to go up and hands are going to go up. I don't know, a little bit of a game, but a real serious degree of vulnerability of a leader who's willing to stand in front of people saying, this is something that I'm trying to work on. Now, that gives me a little bit of a license. No, it gives me a lot of license. I'm going to try to help you do the same thing. Your thing may not be my thing, but you've got your thing, and I got my thing. I'll help you with your thing. You help me with my thing. I just think there's a huge, huge benefit to leaders who will not view themselves as separate and apart from the team. That's a huge, huge deal in all of my work. Leaders who feel like they sit at the head of the table and it's them, and then there's these people that are around the table in front of them. And it's as though there's two groups. No. In high-performing teams, there is a team. The roles are different, admittedly. Head of the table has a different role. I get that. But you're still part of the team. And when it comes to these things that we wrestle with ourselves and the things that our individual team members are wrestling with, if we're a team, let's just wrestle these things together.
I would summarize it this way, along those lines. You talked about accountability. We've talked about leadership and its definition as a focus on others. In the past, we've talked about crucial conversations. If you want to have a high-performing team, you have to have these conversations about your teammate that you can help become a better version of themselves, a focus on them. If you do not do it, you're only serving yourself, period.
Thanks for watching and listening to Grow Great, the City Government Leadership Podcast. For Lisa Norris, I'm Randy Cantrell. Be well, do good, grow great. The website is growgreat.com.